The second theme addressed in this webinar introduces the theoretical framework for the teaching of phonemic awareness, phonics, and word work. These concepts underlie this theoretical framework: a whole-to-part-to-whole approach, universal aspects of literacy, and 3 ways to experience print. The first theoretical component behind the teaching of phonics, phonemic awareness, and word work within Literacy Squared is the whole-to-part-to-whole approach. This approach to literacy development explains that we learn to read and write from whole to part, not from part to whole. This holistic view places comprehension and meaning-making at the center of reading and writing. Readers and writers come to control the parts and the relationships among them as they learn to make sense of the whole. Literacy Squared emphasizes instruction that is based on complete texts that are interesting, meaningful, and relevant to students, such as bilingual books, poems, songs, articles, and informational texts. The use of high-quality children's literature maximizes meaning construction and expression as well as student engagement. Giving explicit attention to smaller units of language forms can help children to unlock the meaning of the text. However, phonemic awareness and phonics instruction are not a prerequisite for the teaching of reading and writing. Through modeled, shared, and collaborative literacy methods, teachers can demonstrate the reading and writing processes, engage children in functional uses of written language in our lives, and nurture their natural dispositions to make sense of texts. Another underlying premise for the teaching of phonics, phonemic awareness, and word work is that literacy is based on universal concepts that go across languages. These functions represent concepts, strategies, and skills that form the foundation for literacy in every language. The social and pragmatic function represent the process and social aspect of being literate. The semantic function represents the purpose of communication and meaning. The syntactic function provides the rules that govern how literacy is formed and used. And the final is the orthographic graphophonic function, which is the sound letter system created to connect oracy to print. Phonics and word work fall within orthographic graphophonic function of literacy development. These universal aspects, once learned, do not need to be relearned in another language that also uses an alphabetic writing system. The activation of these 4 functions is what guides the delivery of phonics, phonemic awareness, and word work when teaching to read and write in Spanish. A third premise for the teaching of phonics, phonemic awareness, and word work is that students experience print in 3 ways: logographic or sight recognition, alphabetic, the sound to letter, letter to sound process, and the third way is orthographic, which is meaningful patterns within words. Literacy development begins with logographic reading, where a child first learns from contextualized environmental print and acquires a small sight vocabulary of written words. These words are usually words that are meaningful and have been presented visually many times. The act of reading to and reading with provides students with the logographic experience. The desire and need to write brings about change from the logographic experience to the alphabetic experience. The child learns that spoken words can be broken down into speech sounds, or phonemes, that map onto letters. This experience demonstrates the power of the reciprocity of reading and writing. Students begin to make connections when they read and write, reinforcing the learning of the other. The orthographic experience begins through considerable practice at reading and writing using an alphabetic strategy. The child learns to recognize words as orthographic units, Word recognition occurs by accessing stored internal representations of abstract letter-by-letter strings. Teachers provide these experiences and recognize opportunities to move students from one to the other. Sight word recognition is probably the first way a child learns to read. It is usually words that have significant meaning to them and that they see often. Examples of these would be their name or names of their loved ones or things they like or visit. Environmental print is a way to direct children's attention to words, how print conveys meaning, and how it has a functional purpose. Examples are stop signs, McDonald's, Dairy Queen, Dora, Transformers, Kmart, Mickey Mouse, etc. In teaching students to read and write, we must make sure we are providing students with opportunities to expose them to high-utility words in meaningful settings so that students begin to recognize these words automatically. In Spanish, the majority of high-frequency words have a high sound-letter correlation, while in English, many of the high-frequency words consist of words that do not. In either case, the goal is to get students to read and write these words as a whole unit, not by sounding out. The key is to always have them in a meaningful context, providing many opportunities for students to see them in these meaningful settings. When we match oral reading to printed language, we provide opportunities for students to begin to recognize and visualize print as a whole unit of meaning. Modeled and shared reading helps students begin to grasp language beyond what they could do alone. And the use of songs and poems bring together the nuances of language. Using charts or document cameras make the visual print accessible to all. The use of little books can provide another opportunity to read and reinforce what they are doing as a whole group. When labeling around the room, it should be done in meaningful units. Instead of one-word labels, use phrases or short sentences. Instead of mesa or silla, it can be labeled as a sentence. Esta es una silla, or yo veo la mesa. This promotes the high-utility words in context. Word walls need to be used for activities. Besides being a reference, activities for meaning and analyzing words can be done. Playing the game, I'm thinking of a word that has 2 syllables, begins with the letter T, and is a kind of animal. Students can search and find words using these characteristics. The alphabetic method involves hearing sounds, matching a graphic symbol to a sound, and learning to decode words in reading and writing using this strategy. This method is used in both Spanish and English. However, teaching the conceptual process is different. Teachers must use a method that is authentic to the language being taught. Spanish is considered a more transparent system. This means that there is a high level of consistency between sounds and letters. Vowel sounds are consistent. Many consonant sounds do not exist in isolation because they are not aspirated. Thus, it is more natural to begin by identifying syllables, sílabas sencillas. English is less transparent. Each vowel has more than one sound. The most common is a short vowel sound, which makes up 63% of words. And it is more efficient to begin with learning the consonants and matching them up to the short vowel sounds within the pattern of onset and rhyme. Through meaningful text, teachers begin to classify words that reflect what we want to focus on when breaking down print, and students begin with words they know and learn other words with similar sounds. This must be reinforced in both reading and writing, and examples of how to do this in a lesson will be shared later in the presentation. The third method involves meaningful chunks within words. As we become familiar with words, we begin to recognize parts of words and their meanings, and we do not decode letter by letter or in Spanish, sílaba por sílaba, but instead we recognize these meaningful chunks within the words that are familiar or known. Let's try it. Look at this word and say it out loud. This is a word that is made up, and probably one that you have never read or decoded before. As you attempted, you probably did not decode it letter by letter or syllable by syllable. Instead, there was a recognition of the larger meaningful chunks, such as morpho and phobia. These known chunks also allowed us to apply meaning to this word, and this word could mean fear of change or fear of words. It would be decided based on the context around this word. For Spanish, this word has the meaningful chunk bamba, which denotes movement, and learon, which tells us it's a verb, involving more than one person and that it occurred in the past. These chunks is what gave meaning to the word and allowed us to decode it looking at the meaningful chunks rather than letter by letter. The third method involves meaningful chunks within words. For Spanish, this also involves the written accent mark, which can signal change of meaning in words. What we find as we become proficient readers, problem-solving text is done mostly through this process. In Spanish, word families revolve around meaning. Like Spanish, English also has similar patterns based on meaningful chunks. However, in English, there are other word families that look at onset and rhyme. These are words that have the same ending part. When you change the onset or the beginning part, many new words can be generated and called families. Patterns and meaningful chunks of language that are similar in both languages create cognates like dentista and dentist or photograph and fotografía, and knowledge of these word parts can facilitate the learning of vocabulary across languages. This is a great opportunity to make cross-language connections to reinforce the meaning of words in both. Take about 3 minutes to talk about these 3 ways to experience print in your classroom. In small groups or pairs, talk about your use of these strategies and if there is a difference in focus at your grade level. Discuss the difference in this focus from Spanish to English as well.